Not every friendship is as strong as it seems. Sometimes, the people we trust the most, those we've known for years, turn out to be the ones who betray us in ways we never thought possible. This story is about how trust can blind us and how jealousy, when ignored, can grow into something dangerous. Sharon Carter and Ann Hawkins had been inseparable since childhood. They shared everything: secrets, dreams, and big moments. To the world, their friendship looked perfect. But behind the smiles and shared memories, something darker was growing. Ann's quiet resentment was hidden well, and Sharon never saw the warning signs. This story isn't just about two friends who fell out. It's about how envy can twist a relationship and lead to choices that destroy lives. Sharon's life seemed perfect. She had a great career, a loving fiance, and a bright future. Anne, however, felt stuck in her shadow, watching her own life fall apart while Sharon kept moving forward. What happened next was more than a simple betrayal. It was calculated, devastating, and a reminder of how important it is to pay attention to the people around us. This is where it all begins, with a friendship that looked unbreakable, but was far from it. Sharon and Anne were the kind of friends everyone admired. They grew up in the same neighborhood, went to the same schools, and shared almost every moment of their lives. Their bond seemed unshakable, built on years of trust and countless shared experiences. Sharon was outgoing, confident, and full of life. People naturally gravitated toward her because she made everyone feel important. Anne, on the other hand, was quieter and more reserved. She preferred to stay in the background while Sharon took the spotlight. But Anne's reserved nature wasn't just about being shy. There was always an uneasiness about how she felt next to Sharon. While Sharon loved dreaming big about her future, Anne's dreams always seemed smaller, less clear. As the years went by, their lives started to follow different paths. Sharon's natural charm opened doors for her college, career, and eventually a loving relationship. Anne supported her through every milestone, but deep down she was struggling. While Sharon soared, Anne often felt like she was stuck in place. Still, the friendship endured, or so Sharon thought. Anne played the role of the supportive best friend perfectly, never showing how much resentment was building beneath the surface. But cracks were beginning to form, small ones that Sharon missed. Those cracks, over time, would lead to a betrayal that no one could have predicted. This is the story of how those small, unnoticed moments built into something much bigger, something that would change everything. At first, the signs were easy to miss. Sharon was naturally trusting, always assuming the best in people, especially in Anne, her closest friend. When Anne seemed distant after Sharon won Homecoming Queen, Sharon didn't think much of it. She chalked it up to a bad day. When Anne grew quieter during Sharon's college acceptance celebrations, Sharon assumed it was stress about her own applications. Sharon didn't see what others might have noticed. She believed their friendship was strong enough to withstand any challenge. What she didn't realize was that Anne wasn't just feeling left behind. She was quietly measuring her own life against Sharon's, and the comparison wasn't in her favor. Every time Sharon succeeded, it was another reminder to Anne of what she felt she lacked. And while Sharon celebrated her wins, Anne smiled along, burying her bitterness deeper each time. She never said anything outright, no arguments, no open hostility. But in her mind, Sharon's successes weren't just good luck, they felt like personal attacks. What Sharon saw as a friendship full of support and shared happiness was, to Anne, becoming a one-sided competition. And yet, Anne never let it show, not in a way anyone could call out. She stayed close, playing the part of the loyal friend, even as resentment quietly grew between them. Looking back, it's clear the cracks had been forming for years. But at the time, Sharon had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. And Anne, for her part, seemed to be content hiding her true feelings. What neither of them realized was that these small cracks wouldn't stay small for long. They were building towards something far more destructive. While Sharon's life seemed to move smoothly from one success to the next, Anne's path was much harder. She faced challenges that weighed her down: her father, leaving their family, financial struggles, and a broken relationship that left her feeling abandoned and alone. Each of these moments chipped away at Anne's confidence, leaving her feeling like she was barely keeping her life together. Through it all, Sharon was there. She didn't just offer emotional support, she stepped in with practical help. Whether it was bringing meals, covering bills, or staying up late to offer comfort, Sharon went above and beyond. To most people, her kindness would have been appreciated. But to Anne, every act of generosity was a reminder of what she didn't have: a stable life, a bright future, and someone who always seemed to have it all. Anne tried to bury her frustration, convincing herself that she wasn't jealous, that Sharon's success didn't bother her. But deep down, every smile and thank you came with a bitterness she couldn't shake. Her struggles weren't just about what life had thrown at her, they were about the widening gap between her life and Sharon's. This period wasn't just a low point for Anne, it was the moment her feelings of inadequacy and jealousy began to solidify. What started as quiet frustration began to feel like something more personal. She wasn't just struggling with her own life. She was beginning to resent Sharon for thriving while she felt like she was drowning. It was in this dark place that Anne's feelings began to shift. What might have been a temporary strain in their friendship started to turn into something more dangerous. This wasn't just about envy anymore. It was about finding someone to blame for everything she felt was wrong in her life. And for Anne, that someone was Sharon. Sharon's life took another positive turn when she met Jalen Brooks. He wasn't just charming and successful, he had a way of making Sharon feel like the most important person in the room. Their connection was immediate, and it wasn't long before they became inseparable. For Sharon, Jalen wasn't just a boyfriend, he was someone she could see building a future with. When Sharon introduced Jalen to Anne, she expected Anne to be just as happy for her as she was. At first, Anne played the part of the supportive friend. She smiled, asked questions, and even complimented Jalen. But deep inside, something was shifting. Jalen wasn't just another part of Sharon's happiness. To Anne, he symbolized everything she felt she was missing in her own life: love, stability, and a future that seemed out of reach. The more time Sharon spent with Jalen, the more Anne's feelings of resentment grew. It wasn't just envy anymore, it was frustration. Anne couldn't understand why everything always seemed to go Sharon's way. First, her career and successes, and now this perfect relationship. It felt like Sharon was living the life Anne had dreamed of, while Anne was stuck in place. But Anne didn't show her true feelings. Instead, she stayed close, pretending to share in Sharon's excitement. On the surface, everything looked fine. Sharon saw Anne as the same dependable friend she had always been. But beneath the surface, Anne's jealousy was turning into something far more dangerous. As Sharon's relationship with Jalen grew stronger, Anne felt her own life slipping further into the background. She didn't just want what Sharon had, she wanted to find a way to take back control of the narrative. It was a turning point, though no one knew it at the time. For Sharon, Jalen represented love and security. For Anne, he was the spark that would ignite a chain of events no one could have foreseen. As Sharon and Jalen's relationship blossomed, Anne's jealousy grew harder to contain. While she still maintained the image of a supportive friend, her actions started to tell a different story. Anne began testing boundaries, trying to insert herself into their relationship in small but noticeable ways. It started with harmless-seeming comments, subtle digs disguised as jokes, and questions that hinted at doubts about Jalen's intentions. Anne also found new ways to connect with Jalen directly, reaching out under the pretense of casual conversations. At first, it seemed innocent, checking in about Sharon or offering friendly advice. But her messages became more personal over time. She started planting seeds of doubt, framing her concerns in ways that made her look like she was just being protective of Sharon. Jalen noticed something was off. While Anne's messages were polite on the surface, there was an undertone that felt manipulative. She hinted at Sharon's flaws in ways that seemed calculated to make him question their relationship. But Jalen, loyal and perceptive, didn't take the bait. He kept his distance, responding only when necessary and never engaging beyond polite conversation. When her subtle attempts didn't work, Anne's frustration began to show in other ways. She started withdrawing from Sharon emotionally, claiming she was too busy or overwhelmed to spend time together. It was her way of punishing Sharon for having the happiness she so deeply envied. To Sharon, it just seemed like Anne was going through a tough time, and she tried harder to support her. But to Anne, every act of kindness felt like another reminder of how perfect Sharon's life seemed. It was a quiet battle, one Anne was fighting alone, fueled by resentment she refused to confront openly. This was the beginning of Anne's deeper attempts to sabotage Sharon's happiness. The small cracks in their friendship were widening, but Sharon, ever trusting, still didn't see the warning signs. And Anne, emboldened by her own frustrations, was starting to plan her next move. The day Jalin proposed to Sharon was one of the happiest moments of her life. He planned a romantic dinner, spoke words that came straight from his heart, and presented her with a ring that symbolized their future together. Sharon said yes without hesitation, overwhelmed with joy. She couldn't wait to share the news with her closest friend Anne. When Sharon called Anne that evening, her excitement was uncontainable. She gushed about every detail of the proposal, the words Jalin said, and the plans they had started to dream up for their future. Anne congratulated her, her voice warm and supportive as always. But beneath the surface, her reaction was far from genuine. For Anne, this engagement wasn't just another milestone for Sharon. It felt like the final confirmation that Sharon had everything Anne wanted. It wasn't just envy anymore, it was anger. She couldn't understand how, no matter what she did, Sharon always seemed to win. And now, Sharon had Jalen's full devotion, something Anne had secretly longed for since the moment she met him. Anne's resentment turned sharper after that call. She began to feel more isolated from Sharon, as if the engagement was a wall she couldn't break through. Sharon was too busy celebrating her new chapter to notice the shift. To her, Anne's reaction seemed supportive, just as she had expected. But for Anne, it was another step toward feeling like an outsider in Sharon's life. As Sharon started planning her wedding, Anne's emotions spiraled further. Every conversation about venues, dresses, and guest lists was a reminder of how different their lives had become. While Sharon was building a future filled with love and joy, Anne felt stuck in a cycle of bitterness and unmet expectations. This engagement didn't just solidify Sharon's happiness, it also solidified Anne's decision to act. The quiet resentment she had nurtured for years was no longer enough. In her mind, something had to change, and she was no longer willing to sit on the sidelines. What started as jealousy had now transformed into a need for revenge, setting the stage for the events that would soon follow. Anne's feelings of jealousy and anger had been simmering for years, but Sharon's engagement was the breaking point. For Anne, it wasn't just about Jalin anymore, it was about Sharon's entire life. Anne felt like she was living in Sharon's shadow, and the engagement made her feel completely invisible. She wasn't content to stay there any longer. She wanted to tear down the life Sharon had built, piece by piece. Anne's plan didn't come together overnight. It was slow and calculated, each step carefully thought out. She knew she couldn't confront Sharon directly. It wouldn't fit the image of the loyal, supportive friend she had worked so hard to maintain. Instead, she decided to strike in a way that would leave Sharon blindsided and broken. Anne began reaching out to people she knew could help her carry out her scheme. She needed accomplices, people who wouldn't ask too many questions, but would follow her instructions. She played her cards carefully, framing her actions as harmless favors or business arrangements, ensuring there would be no direct link back to her when everything fell apart. Her plan wasn't just about hurting Sharon physically or emotionally, it was about completely dismantling her life. Anne wanted to ruin Sharon's reputation, shatter her relationship with Jalin, and leave her feeling as small and powerless as Anne had felt for years. She began laying the groundwork for a betrayal that would take Sharon completely by surprise. For Sharon, this was a time of joy and celebration. She was busy planning her wedding, excited about her future with Jalin, and grateful for the people she believed she could trust. She had no idea that the person she called her best friend was quietly plotting against her, setting the stage for a betrayal so devastating it would change her life forever. Anne wasn't just envious anymore. She was consumed by the need to act, and she believed this plan would finally give her the control she had been craving. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was deeply calculated, designed to take away everything Sharon held dear. And with each step Anne took, she moved closer to the moment that would tear their friendship and Sharon's life apart. 3 days before Sharon's wedding, Anne made a suggestion that sounded like a thoughtful gesture. She proposed a night out to celebrate Sharon's last days as a single woman. "One last adventure before you're a married woman," Anne said with a laugh, her tone light and convincing. Sharon, always trusting, didn't think twice about saying yes. Sharon wasn't one for wild nights out. She preferred quiet gatherings over loud clubs, but Anne insisted. "It's your big moment," she said, flashing her usual supportive smile. "Let's make it special." Feeling reassured by Anne's enthusiasm, Sharon agreed to step outside her comfort zone, seeing it as a chance to make one more fun memory with her closest friend. The club was loud, the lights flashing, and the energy high. Anne, surprisingly at ease, led Sharon through the crowd, ordering drinks and encouraging her to relax. Sharon, trusting Anne completely, followed her lead, letting her guard down in a way she rarely did. Anne made sure the drinks kept coming, her encouragement persistent, masking her true intentions behind laughter and excitement. As the night went on, Sharon started to feel disoriented. The drinks Anne kept pushing toward her had taken their toll. Her usual sense of control and awareness faded, replaced by a haze of confusion. Anne stayed close, acting as though she was there to support Sharon, guiding her through the chaos of the night. But Anne's care wasn't genuine. Every move she made was part of a carefully constructed plan. She needed Sharon to be vulnerable, unguarded, and unaware of what was happening around her. And by the time the night was over, Anne had succeeded. Sharon was too intoxicated to remember the details, too trusting to question Anne's actions. When Sharon stumbled out of the club, leaning heavily on Anne for support, she had no idea that her best friend was leading her into the darkest moment of her life. Anne's voice was calm and reassuring as she promised to get Sharon home safely. But in reality, the night wasn't over, it was just beginning. What Sharon thought was a celebration would turn into a nightmare that would leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about Anne. What happened next was a carefully executed betrayal that Sharon never saw coming. Anne's plan had been in place long before that night. Under the guise of helping her home safely, Anne brought Sharon back to her apartment where everything had already been set up. Sharon, too intoxicated to understand or resist, was left completely vulnerable. Anne's cruelty didn't stop at betrayal. It went further than Sharon could have ever imagined. Anne had arranged for men to carry out a vile act that would leave Sharon emotionally and physically shattered. What made it worse was how calculated it all was. Anne didn't just want to hurt Sharon, she wanted to destroy her completely. While the assault took place, Anne made sure to record everything on her phone. She carefully framed the footage to make it look like Sharon was willingly involved. Her goal wasn't just to inflict pain, but to ruin Sharon's reputation and her relationship with Jalen. The video was her weapon, designed to dismantle Sharon's life piece by piece. By the time Sharon woke up the next morning, she was bruised, disoriented, and completely confused. She couldn't piece together what had happened. Her first instinct was to call Anne, the one person she believed she could trust. Anne, calm and composed, claimed they had left the club separately in different cabs, pretending she had no idea what had happened to Sharon. Sharon's confusion grew as Anne's lies added another layer to the betrayal. She wanted to believe Anne's story, even though something deep inside her told her it didn't make sense. Anne's demeanor was so convincing, so steady, that Sharon doubted her own instincts. Unbeknownst to Sharon, the video Anne had recorded was already circulating. Anne had sent it anonymously, ensuring it would reach Jalen and others close to Sharon. The damage was underway, and Sharon was left trying to make sense of the physical and emotional pain she was experiencing. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of the nightmare Anne had set in motion. Sharon's world began to unravel the moment her phone buzzed with an unexpected call from Jalen. His voice was cold and filled with anger, words sharp and unfamiliar. "I saw the video," he said without any preamble. Sharon, still grappling with the physical pain and emotional fog of the previous night, was stunned. "What video?" she asked, her voice shaking. Jalen wasted no time confronting her, showing her the video that had already begun to spread. Sharon's heart sank as she saw the footage edited, misleading, and designed to humiliate her. She tried to explain, but Jalen's trust had been shaken. The images on the screen didn't match the Sharon he knew, and the situation seemed too chaotic to make sense of. Despite his anger, Jalen couldn't ignore the bruises on Sharon's arms, the exhaustion in her eyes, or the way she flinched at his touch. Something about her physical state didn't align with the narrative the video was pushing. His frustration began to give way to confusion, and he started to question whether what he had seen was the full story. Sharon, overwhelmed and heartbroken, begged him to take her to the hospital. She didn't have the words to explain what had happened, but she knew she needed answers. Jalen, still uncertain, agreed. At the hospital, Sharon underwent a medical examination, and the truth started to surface. The injuries and evidence confirmed that she had been a victim of assault. For Jalen, the pieces of the puzzle didn't add up. The video, the injuries, and the woman he knew didn't align. His anger turned into determination. He wanted to get to the bottom of what had really happened that night. Sharon, though devastated, began to cling to the hope that someone was on her side. As Sharon rested in her hospital bed, broken but not defeated, Jalen started to realize that this wasn't just a mistake or misunderstanding. It was deliberate. Someone had orchestrated this, and it was becoming increasingly clear that it wasn't a random act. For the first time, the shadow of suspicion began to fall on Anne. As Sharon recovered in the hospital, Jalen began connecting the dots. The inconsistencies in Anne's story stood out. She claimed they left the club separately, but surveillance footage from the night showed Anne helping Sharon to her apartment. It didn't take long for Jalen to realize that Anne's version of events wasn't adding up. Determined to uncover the truth, Jalen encouraged Sharon to file a police report. Investigators quickly picked up on the suspicious details. Text messages from Anne to unknown numbers hinted at premeditation. Payments traced back to her raised even more questions. Piece by piece, the evidence pointed to Anne as the architect of the night's horrific events. When Anne was brought in for questioning, her calm facade began to crack. Detectives presented the surveillance footage, text messages, and financial records, each item eroding the web of lies Anne had constructed. As her story fell apart, it became clear that her actions weren't impulsive but deliberate and deeply calculated. The video Anne had recorded on her phone became the most damning evidence of all. It wasn't just about framing Sharon, it was proof of Anne's intent to destroy her. What she thought would go unnoticed was now the centerpiece of the case against her. For Sharon, the betrayal was almost too much to process. She had trusted Anne like family, never imagining she was capable of something so cold and calculated. For Jalen, the anger he once felt towards Sharon turned into a relentless drive to hold Anne accountable. The more the investigation revealed, the clearer it became that Anne's jealousy and bitterness had spiraled out of control. This wasn't just a betrayal of trust, it was a calculated effort to ruin Sharon's life. And now, with the evidence laid bare, justice was finally catching up to Anne. When the case reached the courtroom, the weight of Anne's betrayal became impossible to ignore. Sharon stood in front of the jury, recounting the events of that horrifying night. Her voice was steady but filled with emotion as she described the pain of being betrayed by someone she had trusted so deeply. Each word painted a vivid picture of the nightmare she endured. The prosecutors presented a mountain of evidence, surveillance footage, text messages, financial records, and the incriminating video Anne had recorded. Step by step, they revealed how Anne had plotted every detail, from orchestrating the assault to ensuring the video would destroy Sharon's reputation. Her actions weren't impulsive, they were deliberate and cruel, driven by years of unchecked envy. Anne sat quietly as witness after witness took the stand. Jalen spoke about the Sharon he knew kind, loyal, and loving. He detailed his own doubts and how the pieces of Anne's betrayal eventually came together. Medical experts testified about the injuries Sharon had suffered, and detectives outlined the investigation that led to Anne's arrest. When it was Anne's turn to defend herself, her calm demeanor began to falter. The overwhelming evidence left little room for denial. The jury saw through her attempts to shift blame, recognizing the depth of her jealousy and the careful planning behind her actions. After days of testimony and deliberation, the jury delivered a verdict: guilty on all charges. Anne's actions were labeled as premeditated and malicious, and the judge didn't hold back during sentencing. Anne was given 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole, sentence that reflected the gravity of her crimes. For Sharon, the verdict brought a sense of closure, but it was bittersweet. Anne wasn't just a friend, she had been like a sister. Knowing someone so close could betray her so deeply left scars that wouldn't heal quickly. As Anne was led away in handcuffs, Sharon began the difficult journey of rebuilding her life, one step at a time. Justice had been served, but the path to healing was only just beginning. After the trial, Sharon's life didn't return to normal right away. The betrayal had left her shaken in ways she hadn't anticipated. Anne's actions had fractured her trust, not just in others, but in her own instincts. How had she missed the signs? How could someone she considered family turn against her so completely? The road to recovery was slow and painful. Sharon had to confront the emotional scars left by the betrayal and the assault. Therapy became a crucial part of her healing process, helping her unpack the layers of pain and rebuild her sense of self-worth. She worked through feelings of guilt, anger, and sadness, learning to accept that Anne's actions were a reflection of Anne's bitterness, not a failure on Sharon's part. Through it all, Jalon stayed by her side. His unwavering support became a source of strength for Sharon. He stood with her during her darkest moments, helping her navigate the challenges of rebuilding her life. Their relationship grew stronger, rooted not just in love, but in resilience and understanding. Together, they began to move forward, one small step at a time. Sharon also found solace in sharing her story. Speaking out about her experience helped her reclaim her voice and empowered her to help others recognize the warning signs of toxic relationships. It wasn't an easy process, but each conversation became a step toward turning her pain into something meaningful. Rebuilding her life also meant learning to trust again. Sharon was cautious but determined, refusing to let Anne's betrayal define her relationships moving forward. With time, she began to see that not everyone would hurt her, and she allowed herself to form new connections, stronger and more balanced than before. While the scars of Anne's betrayal would never fully fade, Sharon's recovery became a testament to her strength. She had been knocked down in the worst way possible, but she refused to let it keep her there. Her journey was one of resilience, proving that even in the face of unimaginable pain, it is possible to find hope and rebuild. Sharon's story is a stark reminder of how fragile trust can be and how jealousy, left unchecked, can spiral into something destructive. Friendships, especially those that span years, often feel unbreakable. But as Sharon learned, even the closest bonds can hide cracks if we're not paying attention. One of the most important lessons Sharon took from her experience was the need to recognize warning signs in relationships. Small moments that seemed insignificant at the time, Anne's distant smiles, subtle digs, or lack of genuine excitement during her successes, took on new meaning when viewed in hindsight. These moments were red flags she hadn't seen or had chosen to overlook. Another takeaway was the importance of boundaries. Sharon's natural kindness and willingness to help others often led her to ignore her own needs. She learned that supporting someone doesn't mean allowing them to drain you or undermine your happiness. True friendship should be built on mutual respect and care, not silent resentment or competition. Sharon's story also raises a hard question. How do you protect yourself from betrayal, especially from the people you trust most? While there's no way to completely guard against it, Sharon came to understand that trust must be earned and continually nurtured. Blind faith, even in the people closest to you, can sometimes leave you vulnerable. For Sharon, the most challenging lesson was learning to trust again. Anne's betrayal could have left her closed off and bitter, But instead, Sharon chose to rebuild her life with caution and care. She surrounded herself with people who proved their loyalty and reminded her that not everyone would hurt her. This experience also highlighted the destructive nature of envy. Anne's jealousy didn't just harm Sharon, it consumed Anne completely, leading her to actions that destroyed her own life. In the end, envy doesn't just damage the person it's directed at, it leaves the one holding it empty and broken. Sharon's journey is one of resilience, a testament to the strength it takes to move forward after such deep betrayal. Her story is a reminder to all of us. Pay attention to the people in your life, value those who genuinely support you, and never ignore the small signs that something may be wrong. Trust is precious, and while it can be broken, it can also be rebuilt with time, effort, and the right people by your side.